Hi, I'm Martin Jarvis, and once again I want to welcome you to another perspective. War. That's where we are. Never fails. War. Sometimes war is inevitable, and sometimes it's preventable. Always be the good guy. We're going to talk about today because the United States is facing a very trying situation right now in the midst of a conflict with Iran and Israel and ourselves. And so we're going to talk about this situation, where we are and how we got here, and how we can equate this situation even to our lives as individuals, okay? Because I'm a person that really doesn't believe in failure, that is long-term failures. I do believe in setbacks, but I do consider myself victorious. Consider myself that whatever I put my hand to do, I am going to be successful at it. Now let me qualify that. That means I have to be very selective at times on what it is I put my hand to do. I will not put my hand to do something that I have contemplated and figured that it's impossible, okay? And I will take advice. One cool thing about having AI now at my fingertips, you do have a resource of advice that you can go to. And now sometimes you might have to go a little back and forth with it to get narrowed down, to get something, really clear. But AI is a good tool, as well as other people around. And if you're in a position, in life to make decisions, and everybody is, it would have been good to be prepared, okay? Be prepared to have a mind that thinks, that contemplates, that thinks tactics and strategy all throughout life. I remember watching a show once, and this gentleman, he was an actor, but he made this comment. He said, social occasions are just warfare concealed. It's from a Star Trek movie with Khan, not the movie, the original series with Ricardo Montalban as Khan. And he said that, and it has, and so when I first heard that, it was probably back in the late 60s, but it stuck with me all this time. That social occasions are just warfare concealed. Every situation, every interaction that you have is a type of warfare. Whether it's with your wife, whether it's with your children, whether it's with your coworkers, or your boss at work, or your subordinates, the church that you attend, just the people, the regular people that you bump into, if you're at a store, if you're at a restaurant, all situations are a type of warfare. When I say warfare, I don't mean negativity, or you have to come up with your fists up or anything, but just realize every conversation, every interaction should be tactical. Because if not, it could cost you, okay? It could cost you a bad meal. It can cost you hurt feelings. It can cost you a loss of money, a loss of finance, a loss of job, a loss of relationships. Be very careful how you respond to situations. And I think that the number one point in all of this that we all have to take away is always be the good guy. Never be the bully. Always be the person standing up for the rights of the oppressed. Don't be the oppressor. Because as real as this conversation is going to be, and as logical as it's going to be as well, there is this little thing that's illogical called what goes around comes around, sowing and reaping. You reap what you sow. A thing called karma. For this is invisible, and it's not logical, but it's real. It's always important to have good on your side. Look at the prisons. Look at the prison systems. The criminals that get jammed up. They may be living large for a while. I remember one guy, John Gotti, he was like the Teflon Don, and he was a mafia guy, and he was cool. Everybody liked him. He was like a hero, and a good attorney, and he's always getting off, and always being found innocent or whatever. But it turned out he really wasn't a good person. He had killed people, actually, and had done some terrible things. And what happens, as cool as he was, eventually he got jammed up. That's what happens. That's what happens in life. And sometimes, I feel like the earlier you get jammed up, the less consequences that you're going to have to pay in life. When you come to your senses early in life, the less consequences that you're going to have to deal with, okay? So sometimes, we get jammed up, as young people. I used to talk to young people at juvenile, and I mean, they were like young, young teens even sometimes, and a couple times even younger than that. But if you could come to your senses early, the rest of your life is going to be great. I came to my senses when I was 28 years old. That was 40 years ago this year. And so even when I talk about my past, how destructive it was, and the things that I, participated in that were self-destructive activities, it's almost like I'm reading a story about someone else's life, but no, it was mine. But it was so long ago, that doesn't take its toll. Now, I know people that I used to hang out with in those clubs, doing the alcohol, getting the buzz, and all that stuff. This was 40 years ago when I stopped. They've been continuing since then, and they're kind of jacked up. It's taking its toll. The earlier you stop, the less effect and influence it's going to have in your life. So I'm looking at this situation we have right now with Iran. And see, this isn't a political message, because this is America. You can't, because no matter, it's like your family, okay? You might have ills within your family, okay? But if the neighbor comes over and starts a fight with even your sibling that you are in total disagreement with most of the time, that's still your sibling. So Democrat, Republican, those things you put aside. This is our nation. And so we recognize that the United States is our country. It's our nation. But you still have to look at it objectively, all right? And just make sure you're okay. It's just like your own life. You are you. You're probably your most favorite person. But still, you have to look at your own life objectively. Don't simply justify everything you do. Be critical about what you do. And make sure that what you're doing is righteous. I don't mean righteous from a religious sense, but I mean righteous as far as good. Okay? Because we're talking about right now, whether we're talking about our lives or we're talking about our country and our military, we're going to war. And so it's very important to recognize that you have to be on the right side. We have to be on the right side of things, okay? We can't be the antagonist, okay? Because we have like the strongest military in the world. Tactically sophisticated, can't be beat. Unless we didn't win in Vietnam. We didn't win Korea. We didn't win Iraq. We didn't win Afghanistan. So really, when you calculate it back, I mean real wars. I don't mean Venezuela, where you just swoop in there, not really third world, but a country that really has no military compared to ours. It's not really bragging rights to be able to go in there and take them out and have your way with them, And so the reality is that our nation, as strong as tough as our military is, we haven't won a war since World War II. And that was with allies. Why? Because we were on the side of right. But we have that whole Adolf Hitler and Mussolini thing going on in Europe. And then we got drugged and we were attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. These were evil folks that we were dealing with. And these weren't folks that we had to paint as evil. We didn't have to put out a narrative that they were evil. We didn't have to convince folks that they were evil. They truly were, and they weren't trying to hide it. See, that's a difference. So we were on the side of right. And when you're on the side of right, other people will join you to combat the evil. Very important. Very important. Always be on the side of the oppressed, not on the side of the oppressor. Okay? And I think one thing that we don't do as human beings as much as we should, especially the younger we are, we don't take advice. Always surround yourself. Always have at your beckoning call people that are that are loyal to you, that have good advice. Okay. People that know more than you. See, we think we know a lot. I think I know a lot. I have an associate degree, bachelor's degree, MBA. I'm pretty thoughtful. I study. I read a lot and all that. But the reality is, of all the knowledge in the world, whatever I know is nothing. Now, but if I surround myself with like 12 or 20 people that have knowledge in various aspects of the world, areas that I don't know much about, that makes me stronger. But if I get rid of all my friends because, God, they know more than me. I feel threatened when I'm around them. I don't feel secure when I'm around people that know more than me. And if I get rid of all these people from around me and just bring in people who affirm me, that's not helping me. Because then I'm just relying on my own intellect and the little bit that I know compared to everything that's in the world. And really, comparatively, I know nothing. Always surround yourself with advisors, people who know, people who are experts, people who have understanding in the interactions that I'm going to be faced with on a daily basis. For real, though. I practiced the martial art for 3 decades, from 70s, 80s, and 90s. I practiced the martial, not totally, all the way through, but sometimes I'd lay off for a year or two, and then I'd get the bug, and I'd find a club and join, and that's just what I did, after the 70s and all. Right? Taking different karate, different types of karate, different types of kung fu, jiu-jitsu, judo, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, simply because I wanted to work out with somebody, but I kind of burned my bridges, so I had to find other clubs to work out with. But when I went into those clubs, I didn't go into those clubs like I didn't need to learn anything, that I already know everything. I went in there with a beginner mindset. Now I always was able to keep my belt that I had earned in Okinawan karate. Wherever I worked out, I arranged it with the instructor, and they were cool with it. But I always walked into a club with an open mind to learn what I didn't know, to understand what I didn't understand, to grasp whatever I could from these guys, to grasp whatever I could from those guys. Because I recognized my knowledge may have been intense in one particular facet, but there was so much more that I was unaware of, and I was open. We have to be that way in life, or we walk through life in ignorance and making mistakes that could have easily been avoided. So even when you surround yourself with advisors, it's very good to surround yourself with those who were oppressed, those who understand what it's like to be oppressed. Because if you want to get a clear picture of reality, ask someone who is oppressed, or ask someone who's been oppressed, because they know. See, there's this thing called privilege. We talk in this nation about white privilege, but I want to talk about economic privilege. Or maybe economic privilege. That's a good one. Because if you're economically privileged throughout your life, if you're not suffering, if you're not scraping, if you're not worrying how you're going to get your bills paid, or your lights getting ready to come out, or what kind of food you're going to be able to buy, or putting gas in your tank, if you're struggling like that, or say if you're not struggling like that, there's a piece of understanding about the real world that you have no clue of, okay? And so if you're going to be interacting in this world with all types of people, it's very important to have that type person. Because there's what I call, there's a blindness that comes from privilege that doesn't allow you to see reality. The only reality you allow you to see is the reality that you're dwelling in, okay? Ooh, that was a long way around. Surround yourself with advisors that have knowledge, not with yes men that will simply affirm everything that you choose to believe. That's why, when we went to war with Saddam Hussein, Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, all the yellow cake and the rods and all that stuff. Remember, Colin Powell got on TV and explained all this stuff to the American people. Now, some say he was duped, but who really knows? But all I know is most of the American population was duped. But if you go down the line of the American population that was duped, you're going to find the people of color in this nation. We knew. We knew Saddam Hussein didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. Why is that? Because we've been on the receiving end of being accused of stuff we didn't do, having to suffer the consequences, even being in prison, even being lynched and killed and murdered, fired, all kinds of negativities in our life, having been accused of what we didn't do for whatever the agenda was of the accuser. So we knew. We can tell by body language. I can tell by body language of the accuser. I can tell by body language of the accused, only because this is not an unfamiliar situation for people of color in this nation. Not to digress too much, but I remember I was in about the 4th grade or so, and this was like in the late 1960s, okay? So right off of the civil rights movement, right around that time. A lot of white people were kind of tripping a little bit from that. Now me and my family, military family, I had been in Europe for like 5 years, you know, as a kid. So when we came to the States in the late 60s, I wasn't even aware of the civil rights movement. My father was an E9, which is the top enlisted rank, so we didn't have to suffer any issues on base because he outranked all of the enlisted people, okay? So everywhere we went on base, there was never an issue. Plus, we were in another country, and then came to the States. So now I'm in the 4th grade sitting there, and I'm in this little school where they decided to start us changing classes, like 3 changes a day, trying to get us ready for, you know, junior high school and all. And I remember this one day, so I was in another class sitting at a desk, and I was having my lunch there. Back in those days, we had those real old desks with the wells that like lifted up. You know, remember those old-fashioned desks? Some of y'all do. Well, anyway, I was playing with my pencil, and that desk had like a hole in it. It was so old. And my pencil fell through the hole. And so, of course, I just lifted up the desk and got my pencil out. Well, somebody had seen me open that desk. And somebody had claimed that there was some money missing out of that desk. And I guess somebody told. So now I have these 3 adult white teachers, 2 female, 1 male, standing over me, a little 4th grade kid, accusing me of stealing something out of that desk. And I'm saying I didn't take anything. It was my pencil fell through. I was trying to explain, but they berated me. No, we know you stole it. We know you stole it. I was crying. These adults were berating me. And that was very traumatic for my life. And finally, you know, at the end of school, I went home. I wasn't even going to tell my mother because I was kind of embarrassed. But when I got home, she asked me what happened because the teachers had called and said that when I came home, I would probably be a little bit upset. They were nervous. And if they had really known my mom, they would have had a reason to be nervous. But anyway, nothing came out about that. But these are kind of experiences people of color have had in this nation. And so even to be an adult like that, a white adult, to be berating a 4th grade kid like that to the point of tears with accusations, there is a privilege in that, a privilege of the oppressor, that they would even take comfort in finding themselves being that way, berating and bullying a little kid. So you're talking about a little black kid now that grew up like this. That was one of many instances that I had gone through growing up in life. Situations that were unfair that I had to deal with, that realized it and had to experience it. So now as I become a man, and by this time with the whole Saddam Hussein thing, I mean, I had been long out of the military, but so I'm a grown man. I was at the base, right, Patterson Air Force Base, at my son's baseball game, and I was sitting next to this white lady, real cool white lady. Our kids were on the same team, and it was the day before the bombing, before shock and awe, before we went in there to bomb Iraq, with that challenge out there for him to cough up, for him to admit he had the weapons of mass destruction, and we were talking about it. This woman knew that he had weapons of mass destruction. I knew he didn't. Because from her particular place, this white lady, this white privilege in America that had never really been on the side of being the oppressed or being the accused, she couldn't comprehend that her government wasn't being honest with her. She just believed everything they said. Me, as a black man in America, I wasn't going to believe everything they said. I looked at their body language. I looked at their words, their actions. And then I empathized with Saddam Hussein. I mean, he was a bad guy, but he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Because I understood. So when you have those advisors, have part of your advisors people who understand what it is to be oppressed, even if they're no longer oppressed. But they understand what it's like to be oppressed, okay? Very important. And so as we begin to look, you know, as we're facing this war, right now we have thousands of troops in Iran, or getting ready to land there. And so then we have to consider what I consider, see, I'm a student of Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I've played chess from the time I was a kid. Everything I do is tactical in life. As I said, all of your interactions need to be tactical, need to be strategic. But from the art of war, Sun Tzu, which is very interesting, they teach at West Point. So if you have advisors that have been to West Point, if you have advisors that have been in combat situations, have been in diplomatic situations, have been involved in these areas that you find yourself involved in, even as a nation, you want those people around you. You don't want yes men just telling you everything you want to hear, because you don't have good solid advice, okay? You need to have people that know what you don't know. And so you're getting ready to go, into a conflict. And you think, well, what would Sun Tzu teach, And well, you don't, first of all, number one is, if you're getting ready to face an enemy, you don't presume the enemy. Now what I mean by not presuming the enemy is, you don't know what that enemy has. You don't know how strong he is. You don't know where his weapons are. You don't know his resolve. You don't know his motivation. You back a cat up against a wall, they're going to fight you. Okay, so you don't know the strength of the enemy. All you know is your strength. You know how much work that you've put into your ability, shoring up your weapons and your experience and your skills and all, but you have no idea what your enemy is about. That's Sun Tzu right there. Man, we went into Vietnam, strongest nation in the world, state-of-the-art weaponry, all kinds of bombs. We dropped tons and tons of bombs on those people. And they're running around wearing what looked like pajamas and straw hats. And we lost. I don't know if you remember the picture, on top of the embassy where the helicopters, the last helicopters pulling off, and people are just hanging on, and some of them falling off just trying to get out of Vietnam. We lost to those people. Because we underestimated their resolve. And even worse, as it turned out, we were on the wrong side. We were not on the side of the people. Those that we call the Viet Cong or the Viet Minh, that the French had to deal with before we got involved. That was the will of the people. They wanted to be communists. We didn't want them to be communists, because we were fighting a whole new battle with the Russians and the Chinese over here, trying to make sure that democracy was getting a foothold in that area rather than communism. So that whole Vietnamese thing, the Gulf of Tonkin, that was made up. That didn't happen. The whole Vietnam War, we were on the wrong side. Now, don't get me wrong. My father was in Vietnam in '65. I had a brother that was there in '67. Another brother was in Thailand, right on the border, in '69. We come from a military family. My sister was Desert Storm, a medic. So another brother and I were peacetime. So we're military people, and my family served in Vietnam. But as we understand from a historical perspective, we were on the wrong side. So you recognize that you can't win if you're on the wrong side. Our CIA knew we were on the wrong side. Now, I'm not even faulting the CIA, because I understand that there was a competition between Russia and China and us to make sure there was more democracy in that region than communism. I understand that. But the reality is, we were not fighting for the will of the people, so we lost 55,000 lives of American soldiers in a war where we were the bad guys. And then to top that off, how many Vietnamese did we kill? Over 1 million. And we were the bad guys. So we talk about that whole karma, what goes around comes around. We reap what we sow, chickens coming home to roost, whatever. We couldn't win that. That's why the French couldn't win. That's why they lost at Bien Minh Phu, a terrible defeat. That's when they left Vietnam. The commander of the French forces, he actually killed himself because he was so humiliated. And then we took over on the wrong side, okay? And so I'm just suggesting it's imperative to always be on the right side in a conflict. The Korean situation, North Korea and South Korea, I'm not saying that we were on the wrong side. There probably wasn't really a right or wrong side. There was the Civil War, and so what we were doing was we were using that land to fight against the Chinese and of course the Russians as well. So in a sense, the Chinese and the Russians and us using Korea as the chess pieces, fighting each other through their lives and our lives, that we couldn't win that either. It came out to be a stalemate. And in Iraq, Saddam Hussein, no weapons of mass destruction. We really messed that up. And then defeating the army was ready to cooperate. We ended up firing all the army, firing all the experts. After Saddam was gone, they became Al-Qaeda. Man, it was like, you have to be on the right side, or there's going to be some type of reason why it doesn't work. And so, you know, it's just important. It's important to be on the right side. It's important to know your enemy, to know what fuels your enemy. And you can't know the strength of your enemy. You can only guess. All you can know is your own strength. So you walk into a situation then that you don't have really any idea how strong your enemy is. And then you don't have right on your side. Man, you're in trouble, okay? You should have advisors that are experts, that understand what they're doing. So we're walking into a situation now. And another tenet of Sun Tzu then is don't fight uphill. That makes sense. We've seen the Hamburger Hill, we've seen the movies. You don't fight uphill because the enemy has an advantage of just shooting down at you. You know, back in the old days, they could, you know, roll boulders down on you or pour hot oil on you or whatever. But shooting down on you, you can't hardly win. And if you do win, you're going to have tremendous losses. That's what Sun Tzu is. Don't fight up a hill. And so then how does that, that was in Sun Tzu's day, so how does that translate to today? So you have, first of all, you have terrain. You have terrain where you might be fighting uphill. Iran, yes. The terrain is kind of jacked. As well, you're talking about missiles that will be fired at you and rockets fired at you. So if you have stuff coming down on your location, that is just as if you were fighting uphill. Don't do that. You need advisors. I heard they teach Sun Tzu at West Point. You need to know this. Doesn't matter how many bombs you have. Come on, we dropped tons and tons and tons of bombs on Vietnam. And they didn't have half the sophistication that Iran has today. And they still won. Okay? We have to be aware of that. We always have to have right on our side. We have to realize that we don't know what the enemy is capable of. And as well, we don't want to fight uphill. Especially in terrain that we're not familiar with. Man, that's a recipe for disaster. Let's see, what else does Sun Tzu say? Sun Tzu talks about prolonged battles. Don't go into prolonged battles because the people back home get tired of that. They get exacerbated. They have to believe in what you're doing for you to be successful long term. And you don't deplete the resources of the people in your own land. It's like we just took the whole art of war and just tossed it right out the window, and we're sitting here. You know, I'm a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel. I'm a firm believer in taking advice. I'm a firm believer in you should never, ever go into battle unless you have ingested the art of war, Sun Tzu, into your being. That for me, I know I've probably read The Art of War over 100 times, okay? Either read or listened to it on an audiobook. I live my life by the teachings of Sun Tzu without having to consciously think about it. That's where you need to be. Yeah. Because tricks aren't going to work. Yeah, I know we did, you know, where when Schwarzkopf took the troops into Iraq, he did kind of use a tenet of Sun Tzu where he had everyone thinking they were coming from the sea, okay, and then he didn't. You know, that's a strategy of Sun Tzu as well. You know, and so we have to. And I think that we have tried to do that with even with the Iran situation, where we kind of act like we were having talks, negotiations, and in the middle of it bombed them. That sort of right out of Pearl Harbor, you know. That's what they did. That's what the Japanese did. But anyway, it just doesn't work. I think it worked twice. I think that's what we did the first time, earlier this year, or last year, where we were in negotiations and we bombed them. And we did it this time, negotiations, and we bombed them. They just recently said, we're going to give you a 5-day reprieve, and it's about a half a day later, we bombed them. So it's like that's getting old. And so now that's the problem we have here right now with this opponent, is that there can't be tricked. I know when I first started the martial art, when we'd be sparring, there was this one move where you're sparring and you throw a low kick, and then you throw another low kick, then you throw another low kick, then you go low and then go high. And it used to always work, but that'll only work a few times. It's not gonna work anymore, okay? Because everybody knows. So we got ourselves in a mess. Always be the good guy. Always be honest, okay? And never be the bully. Never be the aggressor. Right now, we're just a very rough situation. But that is another tenet of Sun Tzu. There's something else Sun Tzu talks about. Well, just to make sure you're not using up all the resources from home. That is taxing the people and needing more. I think we just asked for like $280 billion, okay? This is what exacerbates the people. So we have another situation as well. When you start losing a lot of your army, a lot of troops, and this is the part we have to really be concerned with and really be sad about if this is what happens, but the population, the public at home is not going to be very gung-ho when body bags start coming back. We just can't fly by the seat of our pants when we have situations where American soldiers' lives are at risk, especially with the caliber of excellence of our military. Our military is in a position, a very vulnerable position, where we simply trust the civilian leadership not to put us in harm's way, not to be bullies, not to be the oppressors, not to have us in places where we can't win, because we're going to follow orders, legal orders, and even orders that don't make any sense. Those are still legal orders. Orders that will lead you to a place of disaster. Those are legal orders. Custer, George Armstrong Custer at the Little Bighorn. All those men, they were massacred. They were all following orders. I'm sure some of them were probably seasoned fighters that believed, maybe we shouldn't be here right now. The Alamo was another one. They're following orders. I'm sure there were seasoned fighters within the Alamo that realized they shouldn't be there. And the Alamo, that was a whole other story. The Alamo, that was a criminal organization. We have sort of made them heroes, but the reality was that they were criminals. It was a criminal organization where Mexico had outlawed slavery. And these guys were trying to have slaves on Mexican soil. The Mexicans weren't having it. Santa Anna was a hero. Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, Jim Boy, all those guys, those were criminals. And they got massacred. It's always necessary to be on the right side, not to be the oppressor, not to be the bully. And but anyway, so, let's see, Sun Tzu, what else? Now Sun Tzu does have something that it looks like they might be following, I think by happen chance, but it may not work very well for them. Because I think the bottom line, that has to be the spirit that all our military is marching by, is that in their hearts they're believing that they're doing the right thing, okay? Now if in their hearts they're not believing they're doing the right thing, they're not going to be that enthusiastic. So Sun Tzu had another particular strategy where you take your soldiers to another land to fight, and then you burn the boats, so they can't come back, and they have to fight with all of their might. It's called fighting on death's ground, to where there's no alternative but to win or to die. So they fight pretty hard. And in a sense, that's what our military has done, because based on the terrain of Iran, these guys are just being dropped off there. And then it's simply a matter of survival. So it's really not looking that great, and just apply all this stuff to your life. I think in a nutshell, it's just always be the good guy, okay? And so the takeaway from that is simply that might hardly ever equates to victory. Now might equated to victory years ago when Sun Tzu was doing his thing, when he was writing his. Now there is a question whether Sun Tzu actually wrote those. Are there disciples or people influenced by Sun Tzu had written things down and it was compiled with his name on it. But back in the old days, even with the knights and the large armies, the large army usually won, But not today. With the weapons that we have today, that's not necessarily true. You have to factor in terrain. You have to factor in the will of the people. You have to factor in the sophistication of the weapons they have and the number of weapons that they have. And with our technology today, able to pinpoint particular targets, might does not necessarily equate to victory. Okay, always be the good guy. Always be on the right side. And if you're always on the right side, you're not really going to be in situations hardly or very often that you're going to have to exercise your military strength. For me, I started practicing. My last fight that I had, actually, a real fight I had, was in the 8th grade. I started practicing the martial art in the 10th grade. I've never had a fight since then. Because I'm not putting myself in situations that are going to cause a situation like that. I mean, so keeping yourself out of situations is a strategy for survival in your life. And so that brings me to the next, be careful who you partner with. Be careful who you ally yourself with, because they may be the bully. They may be the trouble. And now that you're connected to them, they're dragging you into whatever mess they're involved in. It's not a good place to be. Be careful who you ally yourself with. Because you might find yourself, they might be the bully. They might not have followed the tenets of Sun Tzu and somehow dragged you in it. And now you're stuck. And I guess lastly, as we close here, be able to admit failure. Be able to admit your mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Hopefully, and when you do all the things you're supposed to do, and I can't express to you how important it is to surround yourself with good, honest people who can advise you based on their experience and their knowledge. Okay. And but the the buck stops with you. If I'm a father and I'm leading my family and I fail and say the lights get shut off, or or get foreclosed on, or lose my car or lose my job or something because of decisions I made, it's on me. Okay. Now, if I had an advisor who was really good at accounting, if I had another advisor who had been watching, all of my utilities and things, I would have been. I'm just saying that you can apply all this to your actual personal life, your interactions. It's always right to be the good guy. Be doing the right thing. Be the champion of the oppressed. Have people around you that are advising you. Never go into battle if you don't have to. But if you do, have a strategy that's going to win. Don't go into battle if you're not going to win. I think there's a biblical verse that says, a wise king counts the cost, understands, what it's going to take. A wise builder counts the cost, understanding what it's going to take to build this building so he doesn't get stuck right in the middle and not be able to finish what he's accomplished, So surrounding yourself with the right people, make the right decisions is so important, but the reality is we still all make mistakes. We still all fail. Be willing to take the blame. And recognize that, admit failure. Don't keep digging, okay? Because the deeper you dig, the more costly the ladder is going to be to get you out of there. So sometimes you just got to stop digging, cut your losses, and get out of the hole you dug yourself. And then just, what can I do with this? I know from my life, although I turned around when I was 28, changed my life, started doing right, the years prior, I should have been in college. You know, I got my degrees later in life, but I should have gotten them right out of high school, but I didn't. Why? Because I was getting that buzz, and I knew I wasn't even going to make college, so I just went in the military. But so I can look back now and say, you know, I got my degrees, associate, bachelor's, and MBA when I was 60, and I can't do even a fraction of what I could have done had I gotten these degrees when I was 25, okay? And it's too late because of the wrong decisions, the failures that I made in life. And so what can I do with that? I can make sure, and what I've done is I've shared with my kids. My son went to college right after high school and graduated. My daughter's a junior in college now, right after high school, on her way to law school. So although it was too late for me because of my failures, the best I could do was admit my failures and then teach the future generations, use me as an example on what not to do. And then look at my rebirth, you know, as what can happen if you continually do the right thing. You'll be way beyond, you know, what I was able to attain. And that's how it is in governments as well. There are times you just don't, like, look at Germany. Look at Japan, how prosperous they are. And they were on the losing side of World War II. But okay, that's what happened. That was their mistake. That's my mistake. I'm admitting my mistake. But what have they done since then? They've become great powers on this planet, great nations. This is how it is. You got to admit your mistakes. You can't function in hubris and arrogance and think that you're going to prosper. You're going to fall. And if you're leading a nation, the nation is going to fall. If you're leading your family's going to fall. If you're leading yourself, simply, fortunately for you, it's just you that's going to fall. But just take the hit. Cut your losses. Learn from your mistakes and share that knowledge. Okay? I'm sure when we look at all the writings of Sun Tzu, which we all embrace so much and so well, much of his insight came not necessarily from successes, but from failures. Okay? Failures. Don't go on an extended campaign, because I know what's going to happen if you do. Don't fight uphill, because I know what's going to happen if you do. So let's not simply romanticize the art of war by Sun Tzu, but recognizing much of that wisdom came from failure, pain, hurt, and death. And now sharing, this is what you don't do. Okay? So we're sitting back, you know, and we're getting ready, unless somehow this thing is brought to an end. But the problem is, if you are at odds with an enemy, and you are fighting a battle, be honest. That way you'll have the respect of your enemy. Okay? And your enemy can trust your words. But if you've simply been negotiating and then attacking them in the middle of like, we could never trust Japan until we were allies after what they did on Pearl Harbor in negotiations on the side, being bombed by them. Come on now, how can you trust that? So you have to be an honorable opponent, so that when the conflict is over, an agreement can be made. With trust, solidifying the agreement. So both parties have to be able to trust each other. And again, remember who you're allying yourself with. Is your ally as trustworthy as you are? Because when you give your word, and this is your ally, and your ally doesn't live up to the word that you gave, you're drugged right back into that mess again. For real. Man, you wouldn't believe, this is what we're going to close with. I did like 17 years, you know, trying to motivate young people at juvenile detention. And when I would go in there and look at the audience, you know, all these young people sitting in little orange jumpsuits and folding chairs in a gymnasium, I would easily recognize most of those kids weren't bad. But most of them were just with somebody who was. They allied themselves with somebody who was messed up, and when they got jammed up, they took them down with them. Okay, it's important to be that. So as a nation, we have to be careful who our allies are, and let's not turn on our good allies. And as a person, it's important to know who your friends are. You know, as you get older, you should have, I have very few friends, okay, because I don't use that word friend lightly. A friend is somebody that I can trust. And a friend is somebody that will give me the loyalty that I will give them, okay? Your friends as you get older should be very far and few between. Always live your life a way of integrity. Let your kids look at you and your son say, hey, I'm going to be that type of man. And let your daughter look at you like the type of man that I would like in my life. That's the kind of man that I want. And I'm telling you, it will have positive results on your nation, and it will have positive results in your family. How's that? Well, anyway, I know this was long. I do want to thank you once again for joining me, and I want to invite you to join me again. You take care. Bye.